This is an interview with Rachel Huber. The date is the 29th of May 1996. My name is Vera Goldberg. The language of the interview will be English and we are in Sydney, Australia.
Rolling.
This is the interview with Rachel Huber. My name is Vera Goldberg. We are in Sydney, Australia. The date is the 28th of May 1996 and the language of the interview will be in English.
Rolling.
This is tape 1 of the interview with Rachel Huber. The date is the 28th of May 1996 and we are in Sydney, Australia. Rachel, could you please give me your full name?
Rachel Huber.
What was your maiden name?
My maiden name was Herscher, H-E-R-S-C-H-E-R.
Were you always Rachel Herscher?
Well, in the place where I was born, my name was Renée and my Jewish name was Rachel. But after the war I decided I'm not French, I'm just Jewish. So taking the lesson of the war in consideration, I became Rachel and I stayed Rachel.
Do you know where you got the name Renée from?
My mother must have read some beautiful book that she fell in love with the name Renée. I don't know. There must have been some French influence at that time in my hometown.
Where was your hometown?
My hometown was Czernowitz, with an interesting history. Until 1918 it belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. From 1918 until 1940 it was Romania. From 1940 till 41, it became Russia, a communist Soviet republic. In 1941, we had a Romanian-German invasion, which is, yes, I think that until the end of the war, it belonged to Romania, and then the Russians just took it back as they usually do.
Were you born in Czernowitz?
Yes, I was born there.
Did you grow up there?
Yes, I grew up until I left it for good.
Which part of Romania is Czernowitz in?
It is a province in the northern part of Romania that was after the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement was handed over to the Russians. Two provinces basically got Bessarabia in Bukovina, and both were heavily Jewish population. It had a great amount of Jewish population.
And Czernowitz was in which one?
In Bukovina.
What is your date of birth?
The 16th of November 1925.
So what age does that make you now?
70! I'm 70 and a half already.
Could you tell me a little bit about Czernowitz?
Czernowitz, in the past one usually sees only the pink side of a place. It was a lively Jewish city with a rich Jewish cultural life. It was an exuberant city, as much as I can remember.
How big was it?
Pardon?
How big was it?
Hard for me to tell now, because these are one of the things that I don't recollect. I think that there were 100 or 120,000 Jews in Czernowitz, but I don't recollect the exact. That might have been less than that, but I don't recollect the exact number.
Were there non-Jewish people who lived in Czernowitz?
The non-Jewish people that were in Czernowitz were mostly Romanians that came with the administration after 1918, with the Romanian administration of the city. There were a few professionals. There were peasants that were around the town, but in the town, I think there must have been maximum 10% Romanians, maximum that I recollect of.
So the life there was
It was a Jewish life. It was a Jewish city with a very active Jewish life, who had a lot of Zionist parties. There was the Bund. There was everything on the Jewish interest. There was. I was a bit too young to be so much part of it, as much as I know that my father was member of a Zionist organization. My grandfather belonged to one of the numerous Batei Knesset temples, would you say here, or shuls, synagogues, that we had in Czernowitz. We had a Jewish theater, we had a Hebrew school. It was a nice city.
Was it an Orthodox Jewish town?
It is hard for me to answer that. Most people were traditionally religious. All the variations that we've learned in the last few decades to acknowledge, I do not know how they were in Czernowitz. It's something that I cannot answer. My grandfather was a traditional Orthodox Jew. My father not. My father was a national thinking Jew, but he was not religious.
What was your father's name?
Gustav Herrscher. He was a tailor. He was born in Poland in a little town called Skala, which was on the Russian-Polish border. When he was in World War I, sorry. In World War I, when he was a soldier in the Austrian army, he happened to be in Czernowitz. And when the peace treaty in Versailles was signed, he just remained in Czernowitz because he liked the atmosphere, he liked the Jewish life there. And later on, he married my mother, and so he remained in Czernowitz as a Polish citizen.
What work did he do?
He was a tailor by occupation.
Tell me a little bit about your father as a man.
My father was a wonderful man, a really wonderful man. He was clever. He didn't have much education. He had only Jewish education, going to Cheder and going so on. But he was a voracious reader who educated himself all his life. He was warm, he was kind. He was the best father a daughter could dream of. He was a wonderful grandfather to my two daughters. He was a good Jew. I think that the thing that I value so much for him was his consistency. When we were in the ghetto and he had a chance, one of his former clients, who was a priest, a Romanian priest, who approached him and suggested to him that if he would be baptized, he could give him a certificate that he is not Jew, and then eventually he could maybe get out of the ghetto as a Christian. And his answer, my father's answer was, my father was a Jew, and my child is Jewish, and I'm Jewish, and if I have to die, then I'll die because I'm Jewish, but I cannot change my religion. And I saw that under the circumstances that we lived then, which was a matter of life and death, his standing upright and not being crushed by the surroundings and by the awful, hopeless situation in which we were, I thought showed me that he had colossal internal integrity. And if there was possible to love him more, I loved him even more for that.
Tell me about your mother. What was her name?
My mother's name was Berta Schumer, was her maiden name. My mother was a housewife. My mother was much more limited in her horizon, I must say. She was a very good wife and a good mother. she followed. She was a follower. She was not the leader type. She was a follower. Most probably this was the traditional role of women in that time. But if I look back, I sometimes wonder. Well,
where was she born?
she was born in Czernowitz, but that certainly she was born 1903, and that time it was under Austrian Empire, and her she went to German school, to Austrian school, and we spoke German at home because of all that. In Czernowitz, basically, most people talk German, in spite that it was not a very pure German. Maybe it had 10% Yiddish in it, but because of the influx of so many Polish Jews, but it still was German.
Could you speak Romanian?
Yes, I went to school. In this school you have to speak Romanian, but I never used it outside the school, and that's one of the reasons most probably that I forgot so much from it. I had never used Romanian in the last 50 years or 55 years, so I could speak at that time because I went to school.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
No, I was an only child, unfortunately.
Tell me about yourself as a little girl. What sort of little girl were you?
How can one be objective to oneself? That is impossible. What? Most probably a little stupid girl, I don't know. Always trying to be a good girl. My father was a sickly man. He had all sorts of complaints, and my primate aim was always to be so good that my father would not get any pain. He had a heart condition or gallbladder pain. He was sickly, as I said before. I think I had a certain amount of brightness. I was quite good in school. I was interested. I read a lot. What can I tell about myself? It's very hard.
Where did you live in Czernowitz?
That was Mihai Telemann 6 was the name of the street.
Was it
in
town?
It was a house that belonged to my grandfather, and there was a family house. My grandmother lived there, and an auntie lived there with her family, and we lived there. It was a family house.
Did you have a lot of interaction with your uncles and aunts and cousins?
Yes, it was a traditional Jewish family from before the war. Every Shabbat, the family used to come together and enjoy socially one another. It was a wonderful feeling to be part of a wider. Now everybody is so used to the nucleus family. Now that was a much wider, very supporting family. Whenever there were upsets in life, dished us out quite a bit of upset, one supported the other. It was a very warm surrounding in which I had cousins which were as if my brothers. It was a very, very warm, supporting atmosphere.
The grandparents who owned the house were your paternal or maternal grandparents?
My maternal grandparents. I didn't know my paternal parents. My grandfather from father's side died when my father was 2 years old, and the mother was killed by the Germans during the war, as was my father's sister-in-law. All family, the whole family that he had in Poland was killed during the war.
Tell me a little about your grandparents that you knew, your mother's parents.
My grandfather was what we see, but pater familias. He was the boss of the family. When his word was law for the rest of the family. He was a traditional, he was orthodox. My most beautiful memories I have from the Chagim that we had, either Pesach or Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. It was wonderful to be part of all this ritual, all that those blessings that I used to get, I always was sure that when I'm under my grandfather's prayer shawl and he blesses me, that somebody upstairs that got upstairs blesses me. He was a very imposing personality by his will and by his thoughts. It is funny when you ask me now. I sometimes think when we sit on a Friday night and the families all together and my grandchildren make kiddush, I sometimes think that I wish my grandfather somewhere would see that his ways are not cut off, that we are going in his ways, and that I'm a good girl, that I'm bringing them up Jewish, not only my children, but my grandchildren too. And that would please him, because it meant for him, his religion and all that culture meant so much for him. That was basically, as we say in Hebrew, orach chaim, that was his way of living, and that he instilled of us, and he always talked that when we grow up, that we have to go in the same path. And that was so instilled from childhood in me, that I always feel that I have to do it.
And your granny?
My grandmother died early. I was, I think, 5 or 6 when she died. I remember her only as a very sick woman, very good-hearted, nice, always good to the grandchildren. All grannies, I dreamed of grandchildren, but not much more about it that I can say.
Tell me a little about going to school. Where did you start your schooling?
I started my schooling in Czernowitz in a public school. School days are not a very pleasant memory for me, because in school we had to interact with non-Jewish Romanians who basically always showed their disdain and looked down to us because we were Jewish. And the staff, the teacher staff, was non-Jewish too.
Is this the primary school or the
That
high
is
school?
primary school, and later on in high school. I don't remember any particular incidents in primary school. Yet I remember quite a bit of my high school years, which were quite unpleasant in that respect, that in subject that I was really excelled myself and was very good. I never got the best mention or the best mark, because the teacher just wouldn't give a Jewish girl the best mark. I had several happenings with with the headmistress, who was a particular nasty person, who in assembly once called me out for no reason whatsoever. To look if my eyebrows are not tinted. I was at that time maybe a girl of 12 or 13 who never would put eyebrows. It was not, at that time makeup was not used as here, but it was only part of a constant, how would I say, a constant putting down everyone that was Jewish. It was just showing their hatred, or that we are so much inferior that she has to take care of the way we are combed or the way we are dressed or whatever. I had once a case, it was my Romanian teacher for Romanian language came in, and that was before Easter. And she talked about Easter in literature, different Romanian authors that wrote about Easter. And then she said, and how do the Jews celebrate Easter, or something like that? And she says, you all know that the Jews use blood for baking their Easter bread. And then she called me out, and she says, you get up and you tell them how you use the Christian blood. And I said, we don't use. And she started to mock me, you know. She brought me to tears at that time. And when I came home, I told my father the whole story, and I started to cry, and I said, why? And my father said, that is what we have to pay for being Jewish. We have to accept it. There is nothing we can do about it. There was a certain, I do not know the right word to use, but the mentality was already among Jews that you have to accept it, you have to take it, that it comes with existence, that persecution is part of Jewish existence. There was no hope at that time of a national homeland or whatever. Palestine at that time had very few Jews, in spite that there was already an awakening at that time. There were the so-called Chalutzim that went to Israel, but there were very few numbers, because in the 30s, there was already the time of the English Mandate, and you had to be very, very wealthy to be able to afford the payment for they called it certificate. That means a certificate that you're allowed to go to Israel. The English were very intent to keep the balance, that the Jews should not come in and the Arabs should come from all the parts, from Jordan, from Syria, from Mitzrayim, from Egypt. They were very pro-Arab, as they always were. So there was no chance for us to go to Israel, to Palestine, it's how it was called in that time. So the only thing that was left for us was to accept it.
Were your family Zionistically inclined?
Very much so. My father very much wanted to go, but we didn't have the means.
Let's go back to school a little bit. You mentioned that Czernowitz had a very big Jewish population. What percentage of your class would have been Jewish?
Hard for me to tell you now, after being out of school for 60 years or 55 years or whatever. I cannot tell you. Most probably, I will guess, 70% were Jewish. But we didn't have strength in numbers because of our acceptance. When I look back now, I sort of think, how come that I took all that? How come that my father didn't go to school and didn't protest? Why do you do it to my daughter or whatever? I can only, if I try now to understand it, I can only understand it in the all-over passive attitude the Jews had at that time. A colossal passivity. We are here to get the blows, and we have to take them. There was no rebellion because there was no hope that you could change the situation there.
How did that passivity and that overt anti-Semitism bear on the life of the Jewish community in general? Were they taxed differently? Were there pogroms?
No, we didn't have any pogroms in Czernowitz. We didn't have any. About tax, I must confess that I don't know. I was a girl. My father was complaining about taxes, but I cannot remember any. There was discrimination, for instance, for a job, let's say what we call now a public service. In public service, there were hardly would there have been Jews in public service or in administration. There was there was a sifting always. What are you? Are you Jewish? Then you are on the bottom of the list. There was colossal discrimination. But if there were laws towards about discrimination, I cannot remember. I remember only that after the ascent of Hitler and Hitlerism in Germany, the right wing in Romania started to assert itself. In 1936, there was, we call it the Iron Fist, was a Romanian called Zelia Codreanu came sort of to power, and then we had on the town hall we had a very big Hakenkreuz. How do you say it in English? I don't know.
Swastika?
Swastika, yes. We had a big swastika there, and they started to come out laws that we are not allowed to speak any other language than Romanian on the street. Which made most Jewish people in Chernovitz going stumm, going I can't speak now English, not talking, because most people did not know Romanian. The women did not know. The men already knew a little bit to converse, but except the children, who knew Romanian in Chernovitz? Very few.
What dealings did your family have with non-Jewish people? You mentioned the story of the priest who was a friend.
My father had clients. My father had non-Jewish clients that they came. My father was self-employed, and he had several people working under him, and he had a very good clientele of non-Jews too. They did not discriminate in that respect, coming to Jews, because they knew that usually Jewish plumbers or Jewish tailors or whatever was, they knew their job, and they had to, and it would be a good job, and they wouldn't be charged, overcharged. So this respect, my father had a lot of clients that were non-Jewish.
And his relationship with the non-Jewish clients
was quite okay. I don't remember any particular instances of complaint from my father's side. I don't remember that. I can't tell
What
you.
about yourself? Did you have any social contact with non-Jewish children?
Very, very little. Very little. The others would not have liked to invite me to their place, to have a Jewish daughter, a Jewish girl coming to their place for visit. They wouldn't have liked that.
And you also
I
never...
had all my Jewish friends, and they lived in the same area that I did, and that was enough for me.
How long did you spend at high school? How old were you when you started high school?
When the Soviets came in June, I think it was the 8th of June 1940, I was, I think, 13 at that time, I think so, can't remember, 14. I went one more year to school under the Soviets until the retreat, and then was World War II.
How did school change under the Soviets?
It was a completely different system. It was a completely different system of teaching. First of all, that school under the Russian was a co-educational school, which were not used before. The whole atmosphere, the whole persecution that we felt as Jews stopped. Mind you, there were Russians too who would call you Sarochka with the rolling R. Sarah is a Jewish name, and they made it Sarochka in a mocking way. They would, if they would, they were not allowed by law to make anti-Semitic remarks. But they wanted to show that they know who you are, and then they would call on the street. That was Sarochka, that means he knows that I'm Jewish. So, but I didn't mind. The year under the Russians was a very hard year. From the acclimatization, we had to acclimatize ourselves to a complete new way of things were taught, and.
Let's stop there.
Okay.
And we'll continue